Welcome back to Factorio. My name is Nasty. In today's video, we're continuing with the final part of the three-part mini-series that I have on redesigning chemical science. The goals are to take some of the things that we've learned since the last time I designed this and apply it here. So we're also exploring some new concepts, which are new to me, so we're going to be doing some in-depth testing on that. But mainly the goal of this is to redesign red circuits. So that's going to be the main goal. The second goal that I'd like to do is, once I'm done with the red circuit build, I'd like to create a finalized chemical science design and then benchmark that design itself against the previous version that we had. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. Okay, so some of the things that I know I want to redesign that I already know in my head that is immediately that I want to change about red circuits is I want to get rid of these silo chests. I know I just released a video talking about how they've made improvements to silo chests, but the main problem that I still have personally is that on Novice I always have some ship that's requesting biter eggs. So for that reason I don't get to benefit as much still from the optimizations, so still avoiding any silo chests, especially ones that have high throughput like this, that'd be nice to basically avoid them. So that's gonna be the main goal. Let's get rid of this. In the last one the last video where we talked about sulfur and basically upcycling that for Q2, one of the design philosophies there was starting to use cars. So with that, today there's a couple things that I want to talk about in terms of how cars actually work. So cars are really nice, and they're a lot of people have been telling me I should use them. But I've been mainly hesitant because of how cursed they are, but I'm starting to kind of fall in love with them. The reason why they're so nice, cars in general, is the hitbox is extremely broken. So, for example, I can grab a car, and you can see here I can get 3 inserters to basically insert directly into a car, and 3 inserters I can pull out, and then I can get this inserter here, all 3 of these inserters. I can get 9 inserters basically around this thing completely. But then it can even be more cursed than that, because we can do things like this where we can have a car that is hitting all of these, and this works as well. So you can get these really weird tiling, because you can see the hit, basically this is the tiles that are impacted, but the hitbox is a little bit bigger than that. So you can get all kinds of basically different configurations with that. Now tanks, on the other hand, are just basically the big brother of a car. And the main reason is because the hitbox is basically at least 2x3, right? So this is really nice because this covers these kinds of distances, where before, if I want to do this with chests, well, okay, I'm kind of out of luck here. Because I can do this here. This covers basically the placement of 3 inserters and brings it down to just 2. But then you can get even slightly further, I think, with this, if we go all the way up here, and I could get this and squeeze it one more tile up. I can't do that with chests. That's just kind of the nature of what you can do with tanks. So my concept here today, and just now I'll let you know I've already redesigned it because it took me way longer than it would take in an actual video to go and film and recreate it. So I'm going to walk you through it because mainly there's 2 concepts that I want to talk about. So we've talked about tanks and we've talked about cars, which are useful. The other thing that I want to dive into is using the clocking concept that we talked about for engines when we designed that previously here. So you can see all the components. I haven't put everything quite together all yet. But when we basically designed here the engines, let's just go and speed this up so it starts running. Cool. And then when we designed this, basically we talked about how I use like base 64 and calculate basically all the clocks and then all the nice notes that we took and creating one clock to control this whole entire assembly here. Well, the concepts here were really, really nice because everything here is a nice ratio. They're all 100% productivity, or 50% productivity. So the worst thing that we had to deal with was a 1.5 multiplier. We just had to get things in basically divisible by 3. I'll tell you right away, this is a whole lot harder the moment that we go and get into red circuits. Well, why is that? Well, because you're seeing here there's a productivity of 175%. Why is that annoying? Well, what is 175%? Well, let's say I want each of these machines to basically consume 45 items per second, right? So then I would say, okay, cool. So how many green circuits am I then consuming per second? Well, if I look at the recipe, right, I know that it's going to consume 2 for every 1. So very simply, I can just say, all right, I'm just going to basically go and say, I'm going to take 2 extra circuits. So without productivity, that would be 90 green circuits per second that I'm creating. But of course, I can't remove one of these productivity modules, right? Because then we will get below the 45 mark that we need. So we have to keep this 175% productivity. So in that case, then because we have 100% productivity, 175%, that'd be 175 over 100, basically plus 1, and that would be the number, or just simply, you can just say 1 plus, move the decimal place over 2, and then you just get 2.75, right? So that would be 32.72 infinitely repeating green circuits. Well, that's incredibly gross. Well, that's no bueno, because when you start wanting to go and using clocks for that, well, that's not going to work out really great, because the clocks are expecting, an actual tick value, right? So if I said this and I wanted this in ticks, right, well, this would be, 16 is how often I'm going to pull this out, or basically insert it into there, and then let's multiply this by 60 here, and then, okay, well, every 29.333 infinitely repeating ticks, we are going to basically insert something. Well, this is not too bad. I know 0.33 is a multiple of 3, so that would mean every 88 ticks, I'm going to insert basically 3 swings of green circuits. Well, that's not so bad, right? That is at least a core concept that exists. However, there's a problem that comes with this. That is your normal input rate. Your output rate doesn't quite match that, and because of the 175% productivity, the rates in which they are going to basically line up when you insert something versus drop something off of the belt like this is not always going to work out. And so you actually have to figure out the least common multiple of that. I'll dive into all that in a second, but I just want to say, now that we're doing 100%, basically using 175% productivity here, 175% productivity here, this 2.75 ratio is going to add a whole bunch of divisible by 3s and divisible by 11s all over the place. So that makes the math, if you're thinking about things in base 10, just really frustrating to deal with. And when you want to convert things into ticks, it doesn't work anymore. So that's where we have to bring in the concept of subtick clocks. I've talked about subtick clocks before. I'll link a video that has been created previously that covers it pretty nicely just in a short form. But just basically what it is, it's using fractions of ticks to control and create a clock instead of doing an actual, basically a tick-based interval that we're using. So that's what I'm going to be using in today's video to control the red circuits, and we are going to also be using the concept of cars and tanks to control that. So now that I've given kind of an overview of some of the issues that you get with red circuits, because I'm going to be using a clock and not lead follower for this, so I can get exact clocking and batching of basic insertion swings, we're going to dive into the whole clocking method, and we're going to figure out all the math that's involved. Hey, Editor Abuck here. This next section of the video, it reminds me a lot of this clip from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's not for the faint of heart. What I'm going to be talking through is like very in depth how I wound up calculating some of the subtick fractions, and I realize like the way that I'm explaining it assumes a lot of knowledge on the viewer, especially around like what does a modulo operator do, and like how do like you kind of need a degree already in like advanced circuits for Factorio. So I figured before I get into that, I'll give like a quick tutorial on what even the modulo operator is, and then I'll let you watch the full footage, but just bear with me on that. So I have a very simple circuit here that I've set up just for demonstration purposes. So we have a constant combinator that's inputting a signal of 1 that kicks off a loop, and the loop is created by creating a wire, a green wire here, and looping this back in on itself. So this decider arithmetic combinator in this case is taking whatever the input is, which in this case it's 1, and then it uses this modulus operator. What is a modulus operator? Well, modulus operator is just take the input number divided by whatever this value is and give me the remainder. That's kind of the concept. It's a concept for math. It's also a concept for programming. So we use it here, and the reason we mainly use it in terms of Factorio is to create a sequence of 5 numbers. And so you can see here that if I go and increment this 5 ticks forward, you're going to just watch the output here. It's the only thing that we care about right now. You're going to see that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it wraps back down to what is 5 divided by 5? There's no remainder, it's 0. So there's nothing on the next tick. And always in Factorio, the input that you have here propagates on the next tick. That's a core concept that's important for if you're doing anything with circuits at all. So this is a concept that exists to create a very nice sequence of 5 numbers. Now you can do the same thing and you could say modulus of 60. Well, why is that useful? Well, if we go now forward in time, you can see that if I go 30 ticks into the future here, what do you think our number is going to be? Well, it's 30, because the game itself is based on 60 ticks. So now we have something that wraps around every 60. So that is a really convenient way to do that. Let's go back to the 5 example and I'll explain how this actually applies to in the world of actual programming. So we can do this exact same thing, and I'm using JavaScript for this example, but just bear with me on that. It may not be your language, but it's the one that I'm going to be using for simple demonstration purposes today. So in our case, we're going to say, all right, well, I can say the game itself goes 60 numbers into the future, right? But for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to use 10 ticks as our example today. So then what it does is I'm going to say, hey, what I'm going to do is you can pretend this character here, number I, is a tick. And just even to make this simpler, let's just call it a tick to make it simple. So we'll say, all right, we're going to go and create a loop. This loop is exactly what you're seeing in Factorio here, this loop here, right? A little green wire going back in on itself. And in the world of programming, what that is that's a for loop. And a for loop is just iterate all the way through this until you hit some end condition. In our case, we want to loop until we get to being greater than 10 ticks. So we go 10 into the future. So why is this useful? Well, you're seeing the same mod operator, right? So what you're seeing on that side is exactly what you see in Factorio. So you have the number, in this case, that is going to be the tick that we have here. That is going to be propagating this value. So whatever our clock value is. So we start off at 0, there's no value. In our exact case, we're actually starting off with a value of 1. So the value that's going to be outputted every single time we go 1 tick into the future is going to be the number 1, 2, 3, 4, and then loops back down to 0. And then we just keep the value on the circuit. That would be considered updating a variable in terms of programming. But then you can see that, like, okay, on tick 1, this value is going to be 1. On tick 2, this value is going to be 2. And then when we get to the 5th tick, it's going to go back down to 0 and then restarts the clock. So that is a concept that is really useful in the world of programming. And it's also really useful in the world of Factorio. So here, why is that useful? Well, now we have something that every 5 ticks starts over. So we can just really simply have a decider combinator over here on the output that just says, hey, every time I get back to 0, I want to send some signal, or I want to do something with that action. Or I could say whenever it's the 2nd tick, or whenever it's the 4th tick, whatever that is. But if I set this at 0, you'll see that now every time I go 5 ticks into the future, this is going to wrap back to this condition. And then on the next tick, it propagates the value. So now we can see that every 5 ticks, we have a check mark that comes out. If we want to make this now every 10 ticks, cool, we do this, we say mod 10, and then you'll see that once we go, let's say 10 ticks into the future, you're going to see that now here, let me do this, we'll see that now every 10 ticks this check mark shows up. So that is a very useful concept that exists in Factorio that also is applicable if you want to get into programming as well, to create very simple looping conditions that output on a sequence. So that is a core concept for how sub-tick clocks work, is that we start to say, hey, I want to now start taking a fraction, and I want to do things not in a 60-tick window. I want to do things on an interval that's outside of that. I want to do sometimes something on the 10th tick, sometimes I want to do something on the 11th tick, sometimes I want to do it on the 10th tick again. And you can create those patterns by using the modulus operator. So hopefully that little breakout section is helpful, and then you can watch the full section where I talk through it, but at least having a basic understanding of how the modulus operator work, I think is really important for this next section. So the next part is not going to be anything about red circuits at all. This is just all the math that's involved with the sub-tick clock, so skip to the next chapter if you're not interested in this, but we're going to dive deep into this today. So the last time I explained this with engines and the ratios worked out again because we said it was like 100% productivity, so everything was like a 2 to 3 ratio. Everything was nice, integers, easy to think about. Here with red circuits is a lot harder because of that. basically that fractional rate that I said. So like I know that basically the electromagnetic plant, right? It can make over 45 items per second. That's cool. I don't need over 45. I need exactly 45 items per second. And that's how often I want to swing. I have two goals for this. One, I want to basically output 45 items per second, and I want to double output, so 2 times. So just first off, what I usually do when I start doing this is I start writing down some notes. This is just what I normally do to keep my thoughts sane. So what do we have? So we have 90 items per second. Those are across 2 machines. So there's then going to be 45 items per second at stack size is going to be 16. So I've just kind of written down all the info that I'm going to need to basically make a decision on this. The next part is here, like, okay, so the output swing is going to be then, the stack size, which is 16. And then that's going to be for 45, basically, and then times 60 to get us into ticks. So that'd be 16 over 45 items per second. And then that's going to be times ticks. So that's every 21 1/3 ticks, or 64 over 3 ticks, we are going to go and output something. So now, in order to double swing, that would be just 2 times that. So every 42 2/3 ticks, or every 128 over 3 ticks. So cool. So we basically know that our full cycle time for one red circuit that we're going to craft, we're going to say our cycle time is 16 items, and that's 64 over 3 ticks, or 21.3333 infinitely repeating ticks. So, okay, then the next thing that we'd have to figure out is input ratio. So before, when I said about like that 2.75 ratio that existed, well, this is where it starts to get complicated. So at 0% productivity, it's really simple, right? So I wrote this down. So we have 1 red circuit, 2 green circuits, 2 plastic, and 4 copper. So then I would say, okay, cool. So now once I apply this 2.75 ratio, so just take the number 2 divided by 2.75 and then compute a fraction out of that. You can use a tool like Wolfram Alpha. That's the easiest one. You can just plug in this like 1 over 2.75, and then you can get a nice little fraction out of that. There's also other computing libraries that can do that for you, but that's what I usually use because it's quick and simple. So then we say, okay, 2 divided by this number is going to give us all of these values. So you're seeing that, okay, green and plastic, it makes sense. It's 8 over 11. So that's where I was talking about where 11 starts to show up as a ratio. And then you also have 16 over 11. So just 2 times the amount of plastic and green circuits for every one. So keeping everything then in the same base 11 kind of fraction, that would be 11, 11, 8, 11, 8, 11, 16, 11. So, okay, so now we have ratios at 175% prod. So what does that do for us? So basically just computing this to like an actual integer, that would be for every 121 red circuits, we're going to need 88 green circuits, which I just covered a second ago. We're going to need 88 plastic, and we're going to need 176 copper. So in order to be divisible by our stack size of 16 items, we just multiply the above by 16 over 11. So just to, basically get that subfraction out of there. And then we basically wind up finding that, okay, that would be 176 red circuits for every 128 green circuits, and then 128, 256. So now we have all numbers that are divisible by 16. Cool. So what does that mean in terms of swings? Well, just divide it by 16. I know you could just basically just take the numerators up here and that would have been enough, but I'm just explaining things to hopefully help it make sense in my own head and for you as well. So every 11 swings of red circuits, we're going to need 8 swings of green circuits, 8 swings of plastic, and 16 of copper. Man, that's gross. That means that like the least common multiple of those numbers is nowhere near something that's easy, right? Because 11 is a prime number, so great. So now can be at least a composite of 11 and 8, and then to get 16 in there, it's basically the least common multiple of 11 and 16. So, like, because we're trying to create a clock that wraps around, and then that's kind of the hard part. So, basically, where we get from there is in terms of clocking, we can keep the concept that like, okay, let's figure out how many basically ticks is a full cycle of red circuits, right? So we know that basically we're going to output what are we going to say? We're going to output, our output clock is 64 over 3. That's however often we're going to be swinging the red circuit inserters. And then that's going to go and have a total loopback time of, however, that ratio, 11 times we're going to swing. So 704 over 3 ticks. So basically now I add the extra complexity that I would like to swing 2 times. So, well, that's simple. We just multiply all these numbers by 2, and then that's going to be now the ratio where everything is divisible by 2 and also has the same input ratios that we need. All right, have I lost you yet? All right, anyway, so hopefully not. Basically at this point, the main point that comes into now is more about figuring out like the full entire cycle time. So if you take the least common multiple now of 22, 16, and 32, And then you're going to wind up basically seeing that that's going to be 352. So that means that every 352 total crafting cycles of 16 items, we're going to get to the point where it loops back all the way to 0 again. That's already extreme. That's going to be a very large tick, basically. That's 22,528 over 3 ticks, or basically roughly about 2 minutes for that full swing period. I am not going to add a million circuit combinations for basically 352 decider combinator conditions. That is way overkill, and that would be the brute force way to do this. We're going to try to now optimize this to make this simpler. And the way that I'm going to go about that is actually using indexes. So we're going to think about things instead of now a crafting cycle, and in terms of ticks and swings, we're going to think about, and we're basically going to approach this in an event-driven direction. So we have kind of state transitions through the crafting cycle, right? So I write down some other things and some other notes and things, but basically the way that I wind up saying, okay, we can get rid of this 352 total crafting cycles by just making a very simple change. So we can break this up because we know that basically every single time we craft 11 items, we're going to put 8 items in, 8 items in, and 16 items in. So let's just take this number as our time that we swing around. So based on that, we would just say like, okay, I'm going to create an event where I'm just going to think about these things in the number of times I'm swinging for red circuits. So every single time that I wind up having an output swing of 2, then basically we're going to start at 0 here. So we're going to have 2 swings of red and then 2 input swings. So what I mean by that is like we could have green and let's say plastic on the same inserter, and they both swing twice, basically for the first time. Now, the reason I've broken it up in this way is because then for all these swings here, we're now thinking about this in a 2-3-3-3 pattern. So that when you add those numbers up, that's 11. So by the time we get to 11, then we're very evenly distributing. Okay, it's 2 swings, 2 swings, 2 swings, 2 swings, 2 swings, right? Of copper and of basically of 1 swing for green and 1 swing for plastic. What this leaves us with kind of now is we have broken this pattern up. Instead of having it an absolute pattern of all 352 combinations, we just have basically, we have to add some logic now on when we're swinging. So we're going to have 3 output swings, and then we have 2 input swings, 3 output swings, 2 input swings, right? So now, okay, so this simplifies the issue because now we just have to think about things in a total, basically, a basic cycle of basically 22 times that we wound up crafting 16 green circuits. And so that reduces the time substantially. So now, let me go back to the preview, sorry. So now the base wraparound clock condition is just now 704 times 22, which is 15,488 over 33. This is a magic number. All that this really just means is this is the subtick fraction that we figured out before. And then what this is really going to give us now is this reduces the loopback condition. Before this would take about 2 minutes, and now this is in basically the order of like a few seconds. So, or I should rather, let me actually go and calculate that. That would be as an actual decimal value, 15,488 over 33. That's going to be 469 ticks or every 7.8 seconds. Well, that's a huge optimization. That's a lot less decisions that I need to make. At worst case, I just need to make a decider combinator that is going to make conditions at the worst case of 22 possible combinations. But really, in general, that's just going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's going to be a total of 9 basic cycles we have to do. That's not bad. So we just have to basically configure that. That I can do by hand. I can't do 352 combinations, so that reduces already the combinations by just checking that pattern in. However, so if you would do that in terms of ticks, when you would enable the inserters, it would look kind of like this. So for the first, basically from when the clock would be counting up by 33 every single time, we'd basically go from a start condition of 0 and go to 528, 21, 12 to this. And basically this is just take the number of ticks that the inserter needs to be enabled for, right? So in this case, let's say we know that we're going to be dropping to a belt, so that's going to be 16 ticks that it's going to be enabled times 33. That's where we get that 528 number, because everything is now base 33 is kind of how the clock is working out. So I know this is a lot. We're almost done. So this comes up with like a final clock, which I wound up creating for this, which I'll show here in a second. However, then what I started to realize is that this gets part of the problem solved, and then I can clock just red circuits on their own. And I'll even demonstrate that here. So I'll show this here over in Factorio. So I'll open up Factorio and I'll explain what I mean by that. I'm going to import that blueprint that I have, and this is that whole subfraction clock that exists here. So this was what I meant. We're going to have basically a few swings where these are going to be enabled. We're going to have basically so you're seeing multiple swings here that are batched. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and then there's double swings on the output. And so that magic number that I had talked about before, and you're seeing this is perfectly filling the belt gaps exactly when needed without any belt gaps at all, is we wind up just basically saying, okay, base 33 is our number. Our wraparound condition is that magic number, 15,488. We take the mod of that, and then that just counts up and then wraps around again, incrementing every single time by 33. So then after that, basically, I am just offsetting this here. The main thing that I'm doing is I'm modding here 1408. Why am I doing that? Well, 1408 is how often we are going to be dumping items from this red circuit thing here. So this is the condition for the red circuit itself. So if we go back to Visual Studio Code, you can see there's like from 0 to 528, we're going to swing for 16 ticks, right? So that was basically the first starting condition. Now I have it in a period now of twice that. And the main reason is because of the fact that to get to the point where we actually are double swinging, well, that happens effectively every 3 intervals of the clocking ratio. So this just is very simple, just taking the mod of that. The much more complicated bit gets into the plastic and green circuits side, and this is where all those wonderful combinations all came in, right? So you're seeing all those tick ratios. These are the ones that I computed by hand here, and I calculated out, and then I pasted them in to the decider combinator to put all those values in. And then I specifically offset plastic to go first and then green circuits to go afterwards, and I set the filter. So I offset them by 528, which is just 16 times 33. So by 16 technically ticks in this whole cycle. And then otherwise I'm just setting a check mark. These are the exact values that I just showed in that. And this works, and with pretty much almost no wake lists at all. And this allows the machine to basically continue to run and occasionally run out of one of its input materials, which is great. That's exactly what we want. This is exactly producing 45 items per second consistently. So this was great. I started to use this, and let me go and show you the very first design that I came up with for this. So this uses that exact same clock, and I tried to adapt it then, and I added one more for coal, and I said, okay, that's good enough. So here's this design. And the design, this is where I was saying that we're going to have some cursed stuff in this build today. We have tanks that are feeding in the plastic, green circuits, and copper in here. And you can see just how incredibly cursed this hitbox is, right? We can get this inserter in, 2 inserters out. We can have 1 inserter pulling out of it, and then 2 inserters pulling in, like throwing stuff into it. So you can get an incredibly tight space, a lot of these inserters all wrapping around here. So the general concept that I have here is I'll get right back to the clocking. I'll explain real quick the concepts here for this particular build. The main problem is I'm designing something for quality science, so I don't have now the ability to use foundries because you can't make quality fluids. So in that case, what I'm doing is I'm trying to create a very compact design. In the last video, I talked about that specifically I'm trying to honor this template and have everything perfectly tileable, and that's why you're seeing the cursed nature of this design, is because I said that my constraint is I have to be able to fit it no wider than this. So that's why I started gravitating towards tanks, because I needed something smaller that's not locked to the 2x2 grid that you get from the actual, like basically if you're using like a cargo wagon like this. And that's just where it's annoying, is you can see here this is going every 2, because in order to support trains. So it's not ideal, because then I can't actually fit it nicely in this, basically in this footprint that I want it. So because I've imposed this artificial constraint, that's why you're seeing this, I don't know what to call this. This is kind of like a very a cursed build, maybe, is one way to say it. It's definitely something I've never designed before, but definitely fun to build. So the core tenets of this, because we have a clock, and for visualization purposes, you're seeing when these particular inserters are active. This is all one network. Now, I know I've talked about in the past that, like, there's still some debates of, like, should you split networks? Should you have one network? I think if you're using a clock and they're basically active at the same point, like you're seeing those flickering over there on the right, they're all active at the same time, and then they come out of the network at the same time, and they send those signals. I don't think the overhead of that is that bad for the number of items that are getting computed here, because pretty much all the inserters are making still a decision. And you can see that I've isolated the red circuits specifically because they're out of phase with the other inputs that are getting crafted. So I was like, this is probably fine. So then the next consideration, and that's, anyway, so that's kind of my concept and something that I'm rolling with right now, is that this is significantly simpler to go and set up a whole network for this, and I don't think there's a huge overhead of doing 2 or 3 signals, especially if they show up at the same time in the network. Yeah, we're using tanks, we're inserting everything in here. Just a couple notes, because in fact, not the latest release, but the release just previously of the latest major version, or like at least official version that got released from Factorio, we have the ability to do splitters. I decided, because I just wanted to mess around with it, I just have this particular condition here that optionally loads some coal on here whenever this particular belt needs some. I don't know if this, like, from a UPS perspective, I have not tested this at all. I just thought it was fun, so I wanted to just mess around with it, and it's kind of cool that you can set the filters on the side that you want, and then effectively just optionally pull some items in here when this drops under the amount that you actually need. So I thought that was pretty cool. Anyway, that's kind of high level what this build is, and then I wound up going and saying, well, let me look at this. So there's still a lot of just, like, activations that are going on that I don't really like. And so there's a couple of, like, more expensive extra checks that are happening that I would like to avoid. I really want to avoid this check. This check right here is is more expensive because it has to constantly scan the belt in front of it. I also want to avoid these scans, because you see these, like, extra couple flickers, because every single time this basically consumes one item, that's a craft, and that is a individual check that's on here. So if it does 16 times that this flickers and creates an item, that's 16 checks that this inserter has to make. Now, it's per tick, right, that it has to make that decision. But because furnaces are so slow, I really want to guard the inserters as much as possible, especially if they're reading from a belt going into a furnace, because their crafts are so small and so fast. So that's one that I'd like to avoid. The other ones that I would like to additionally kind of control a little bit better would be potentially the green circuits inserting, and I also would love to be able to potentially change this to not have to use set filters. I would like to kind of remove that. And those are the things that I wanted to do. So going into that, then I realized I've just made the problem 10 times worse, because we had these annoying fractional stuff that we had to deal with for just red circuits in isolation, because there's that 2.75 ratio of 175% productivity. The chain, though, from red circuits down to copper, which is another 2.75 ratio offset, and then especially from copper to green to this, well, that's 2 times that we're doing that step of 175% productivity. And yeah, the fractions get really wonky because of that. So with all that, like, I need to know all of these ratios perfectly in order to know exactly when I'm going to insert the items from this belt into this furnace. Because, like, otherwise I won't know this. So I'll go, like, back into the notes that I had to kind of explain this. So back over here in Visual Studio Code, one of the things that I wound up saying was, okay, cool, I have now the input swings and all those are figured out. The way that I approached this problem was I just said, all right, we've got swing count ratios. So we have, let's just think about things in terms of just like something that's a little bit simpler to consume initially. So for every copper plate, that's going to become 5.5 copper cables because of the productivity multiplier. Same thing then for green circuits are going to require 4 over 11 iron for every 1 green circuit is going to, because of the productivity ratio. And then it's going to need 3 over 2.75 or 12 over 11 copper cables. And the list goes on for copper ore because we're going to have basically 3 over 2 because 1.5 is the productivity, so 50% productivity, so we get 1.5 for every single one. And 1 iron ore, just like copper ore, is going to have the same thing. So then what I did was I just said, all right, let's take the swing counts that we had, which were nice whole integers here, and let's bring them in for copper cable, copper plates, copper ore, iron, 4 green circuits, and then iron ore and coal. So coal's nice because it's just it's a 4x multiplier because of the 300% productivity that we have because of the research level that I'm using for all my benchmarks and in my actual base. To simplify all this though, this is where I'm saying I'm just going to think about this like before with a schedule of 22 basically swings. Well, now I'm just going to think about this in an event-driven way. So we're going to have 11 state transitions that are going to happen. So I broke this out into kind of like a state transition for each of the inserter swings that we're going to need. So this is really simple. As you can see, for every event, my period that I'm oscillating around is 2 red circuits, 2 red circuit swings, 2 red circuit swings, and this goes all the way on because that was my goal. That's what I said. That's what I want to base my whole clock on. This whole reason I multiplied 11 to get to 22. Now you'll see that kind of like this comes into a really interesting pattern. So get 2 swings of green, 2 swings of green, 1 swing of green, 1 swing, 1 swing. And this is so that it can all sum up to the 16 swings of green circuits that we need. So I kind of just wrote this down of like what we would need to keep on moving the path forward. Now, I don't want to create a combinator for every single one of these. I could create one, but what I'd like to do is I can just say, okay, well, in a period like this, I could just basically go and dump 4 swings of green circuits or 3 swings of green circuits. I could do 2 here for this phase for the first index, and I could do 3 here, and then 2, 2, 2, 2, and then maybe have a batch of 3 here and then 2 at the end, or put 2 here. So, and that's where I just like kind of messed around with a couple of those different combinations. And to make that a little bit simpler, I created an abstraction with circuits so that I could just choose which of these indexes I'm making logic on. So I'll explain this now. It's short and simple, but basically the way I'm thinking about this is I wanted to get away from ticks. I wanted to get away from these weird subfractions. And I said, ugh, this is all really, really gross. All I care about is when I'm going to insert something into the actual machine and then get something out of it, right? So what that basically means is I have, again, these 10 or 11 events or 11 state transitions that have to happen for this. So, all right, let's go back and I will now show what that looks like in Factorio so that everyone here can see that. So I took all these numbers and I brought them over here. Let's go back into Factorial, let's go resume, and I created a new version of this. You're going to notice that there's a lot less wake lists here, and there's a lot of double swings that are going on. There's also one giant shared network for everything for green circuits. But you notice something here is that all the items show up for a period and then all go away. So the number of updates over the network is actually very small, but there are a lot of values across it. I don't think that a for loop looping over like 2, 3, 4 items is going to be that bad. That's just a programming term that just means looping over the items and checking, is my condition equal to a check mark? Is my condition equal to a plastic bar? Whatever it is. I don't think it's going to be that expensive. So I was like, all right, whatever. I do not want to run all these networks just to basically have that tiny little optimization. I don't care. I'm just going to hook them all up to one giant green circuit network. That also makes it really easy to go and just tile, basically all have just one clock, especially because my whole goal is to be able to tile these next to each other like this, right? So that I can easily just copy and paste it. That's the whole reason the design is designed the way that it is. So then great, then all I have to do is connect a green and a red wire to the next build, and I can have just one clock for all of the entire blades that I have all connected together. So that would be a nice optimization that we probably can make, and we'll test that out here afterwards. I still don't know if that's worth it, but we'll see. So with all that, the way that I kind of handled this is I just said, okay, I want to get away from those weird fractions. So basically what I just said was like, all right, let me write down all the ticks that it takes for a single swing, double swing, triple swing from chest to chest, so direct insertion. Then I just mark this as uncommon so that it's just easier for me, so I have extra swings. But basically a swing from a belt is going to be 12 ticks, 24 ticks, 36 ticks for 3 swings, etc. I just wrote all these down so that I had easy numbers, and then I just, up here, you can just multiply the logic group by the number that you wanted. In my case, it's base 33 for everything, because that's the same clock that I'm using before. So that just gives me a whole bunch of values across this network that I don't have to care about. And you can just see these are all computed, whatever. Now I just think about it in terms of, do I need a double swing or do I need a single swing? So then what I said was, okay, I have the same exact clock that wraps around, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this by the period of red circuits. So before, where I had this here, you can see the red circuits are are 2 swings. So each index is 1480 over 33 ticks. And we know that because it was 740 ticks, or 740 over 33 ticks, or 21.33333 times 2, is how often we're going to actually unload the red circuits themselves. So that's the base period for each state transition, or index of this cycle, so to speak. So I just took that, divided by it, and that is my signal. That's my index of the state transitions that are happening. So then simply all that I had to do then afterwards is that now I can think about that and I can say, well, red circuits are really easy. Every single time that the clock wraps around again, just basically I'm just gonna swing 2 times onto a belt for 12 ticks. So that's all that I care about. And the next one that I did was I said, okay, we'll get to that one afterwards. That one's way more complicated. The next one was really easy because I just said, well, okay, so right now, and looking at this pattern here, how often do I need to go and swing the copper cables into the red circuits? Well, copper cables are pretty simple because all we need to do for red is, you'll see here, it's basically 3 swings all the way down for every single cycle, except for the last one. That's why this whole fractional stuff and 175% productivity is a pain in the butt. But anyway, so this completes the cycle. So all I gotta do is at the 10th cycle, I just swing twice. So that's really simple. You can just see here then. All right, simple is a word for it, frankly. But what it does is it just says, hey, as long as the index is in 10, just swing 3 times. And then whenever it happens to hit 10, just swing twice. Cool. Moving on. So this made it so that I didn't have to write down all those very verbose tick and like fractional tick values across all these combinators. And then I could even just very simply just mess around. And if I wanted to add an extra swing, I could just basically say, okay, so whenever I want to change this, I could just go and grab number 4, press Q here, and I could place that for 4 swings instead. So that gave me an easy thing to reference, and I could put that all in there. So that's what I did then all the way down, and even for the copper wires, or basically the ore that's getting put in too. Because now we have an easy lookup. Ore is just basically going to be placed in for 3 swings starting at 0, and then basically I said, well, I could just do 3 swings maybe from 5 to 7, because we're seeing that is a possibility there. So then what I did here was I said, well, let me try that. Well, then I ran into an automated insertion limit problem, because the automated insertion limit of this, because I only could get 4 beacons around it, is only going to be basically, let me go press F5 here so I can show the actual limit. It's only 26, so I can't get a 3rd swing in there. So then I said, all right, well, then I'll just back it off simply, and I'll just say, all right, so for that time, then I'm just gonna batch as much as I can. I'll batch this first one in 2 swings, and then I'll wait a period, and then I'll batch 1 swing here. And then the next one I would do 2 swings here, and I'd wait one index, and I'd do 1. And then that simply is exactly what you're seeing over here, where we have all these nice periods. So at index 0, index 3, it's 1, And then you can see because we're picking up from a belt, it's that uncommon signal. And then I did the same thing all the way through for green, and basically for iron ore. Same thing here. There's like 4 different periods that we need to do. And then also one here for ultimately the copper plates. And that meant so that we have just 1 clock for everything that's in here. They're all in that sub-tick fraction. And we have effectively a state transition for 11 unique states that happen for red circuits. And I finally have basically no wake lists at all on these. And I can eliminate the set filter. So yay! Yeah, so I'll give you a fair warning. If you're getting into mega basing and you don't like this kind of stuff, that's fine. You don't have to do this. You could probably get away with it. And honestly, right now, I'm really crossing my fingers and really hoping that the hours that I spent figuring out this monstrosity is going to be worth it in the end for this build here that's fully clocked with almost no wake lists at all to outperform this build. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see if there's some optimizations that can be made still or not, but like, see, hopefully this whole process was worth it. One other thing that I decided to not do was I decided to not clock the inserter that's swinging here, because there's no reason. It'll just, whenever this like basically empties out, this will fill up afterwards. The downside, because this is perfectly clocked, if I just go and take this build here and I place it down, this is one of those things that I just want to be aware, make people aware of. If you're using an exact swing ratio and you see these ingredients come in initially, one of the things that will very often happen, is actually will trip you up if you create a benchmark of this, is you'll think this is really bad because this is constantly picking up multiple swings like this, and it's having constant scans and picking up. Because this is exactly putting in the exact amount of copper ore that we need per cycle. And you can see even here, like, okay, this is going to not actually eventually back up ever. It literally will never back up because it's a perfect fractional clock and it's not overclocked at all. It's exactly clocked. So for that reason, the best way to get around this and still get the benefit of not having the overhead of insert basically the clocks there, just to control it exactly, is just let this whole thing naturally back up. Now there's 100 in here. Great. We can undo that, let it roll. This will just constantly sit here with enough of a buffer. That's all you gotta do. Just don't release it until you have everything fully saturated. And then you always have enough to pick up from the inserter that's gonna do the swings. And that's it. So cool. Hopefully you stuck around for that and you really enjoyed my, at this point, oh boy, 33 minutes of talking. Well, I'll probably just put the whole entire thing in unedited so you can go and see the entire thought process that I put into this. Without further ado, and I'm really excited about it, I want to end talking about this and I want to go benchmark some stuff. So let's do that next. So I just ran the benchmarks. I created a whole bunch of different files. Before I go, and I'm actually really excited to show the results in a second here, but before I get into the results, I just wanted to explain kind of what the benchmark file looks like. This is basically what the bench looks like. It is just 12 copies all the way across here, and there's one version that's going to have clocks for every single individual one like this, and then there's another version that where I actually perfectly tile this, so that's, and then I create one clock, and all I wind up doing is just very simply connecting this to here with a green wire, and then from here to here with a red wire. And that's all I basically wound up doing. And then I copied this 12 times by hand, and then I created 12 instances all the way to the top. So this is then creating per minute, basically over here, or it's about 1 million, or we'll just look at this here, 1.6 or so million red circuits or uncommon advanced circuits per minute. So that's enough to get a decent baseline. And then I did the exact same thing, but I did it for like one car, one clock, one with clocks and cars disabled. So I ran a command to actually disable all the cars, in this case tanks. And then I wound up creating one with one clock, and then I compared the V2. V2 in this case is the version that, and if you missed it because you skipped it over it, basically there's one that I spent a lot more time going and creating all the clocks for. and actually going out and clocking everything to minimize wake lists, which is this design here. And there's also the one that had just the clocking mainly on the red circuit itself and letting everything else rely on wake lists. So those are the two different designs. And then I also included the silo build that I had. And for silos, the one caveat and the one call out I'm going to make, and specifically for this, is because now silos are effectively have no space platform update time as long as you're not requesting anything from the surface. But in my particular case, because I am constantly requesting biter eggs from the surface, this is the simulation that's going to be basically what my actual setup looks like. So I'm requesting biter eggs here, and I have another, basically, what's it going to be called? Space platform that's doing nothing, just to simulate another ship being above the orbit. But this is kind of a real request scenario, and that's going to incur some space platform update time. So for novice still, in general, this should still be kind of an anti-pattern to do silo chesting on novice. On other planets, I think it's fine. Like, I don't think it's going to be that expensive. But because for me, I always have a ship literally hovering over, waiting for eggs. Yeah, I need to take into account. So this is for me and the way that I run my bases. So you might have a different setup, but that's at least how I run mine. So that's why I'm simulating it here. Anyway, cool. We talked about all that stuff. Let's go and talk about the actual results. So here are the results. So I ran them all, and you can see here I've just trimmed the prefix of all those names to make it simple. But there's the silo, the tank V1, tank V2, and then with cars disabled. And what was interesting is you can see just it made, for some reason, a much bigger difference on tank version 2 versus tank version 2 with cars disabled. But actually, like linearly, you can see kind of this drop here, that this actually made a noticeable UPS performance specifically with tanks. I didn't see for cars as much, but for tanks, it seems to make a big difference, just completely disabling them. So that was kind of interesting. Anyway, so you can see like the run distributions were really nice and tight, so that's really good. So then anyway, let's go talk about the benchmark data. And huzzah, I am so happy. All that extra work that I did for creating all the clocks and perfectly clocking everything, it seems to have made enough of a noticeable improvement. Now, it's a lot more control behavior update time. We can get away with not having all that extra control behavior update time by simply just using one clock instead. So that's the main difference that you're seeing here, is you can substantially reduce the overhead of those extra combinators in this case, and I added extra that I needed to perfectly clock everything. But just having one clock wound up being better. So let's do a little bit of an analysis here. So the first version that I had in my current Q2 science design is basically this silo version. This was 18% worse than what we just came up with using tanks. Now, if I don't have tanks disabled, this is basically a 7% decrease from the best one, or in other words, a 10% improvement. So it's still an improvement just using tanks, period. But this is not an apples to apples comparison because we are using so many other different inserters and clocking methods, and like they're not at all comparable. I'm just holistically saying, is my design better, yes or no? And it is. So now you do have to issue a console command to disable the cars. I don't consider it cheating. It does disable your achievements, but I don't care about that. So that's what I'm gonna do, just to disable the cars. And I know this from previously from mega basing, this always was something that people wound up doing anyway for like 1.0. So can continue to do that, and then we can have the cars disabled, and that makes enough of a difference on tanks. Now let's just compare this tank V2 versus this tank V2 here. So here, the only difference is that the tanks themselves are disabled, and you can see that huge drop in entity time. So, but it's not huge, right? We're talking about a 30 microsecond difference here, but relatively, that's a decent amount. So it's worth it. It seems like a lot more for tanks specifically than what I saw with cars themselves. So maybe that's not exactly fair, but as a full apples to apples comparison, but I have legitimately noticed a bigger difference with tanks. So yeah, so great. We have a much better version, and the clocking actually worked out and seemed to actually be useful to go through that entire long essay that I just said about how to actually go and clock that and how I figured out all the combinations and ratios and all those things. So more clocking puzzles in the future for me, which is great because I'm starting to like it. Anyway, cool. Let's go and create like a complete design that puts all the components that we put together for this series so far into one design. And then I will benchmark that against my original version, and then we'll be done for today. All right, this is the part that I'm super excited to finally do. I've been working on this for probably 3 or 4 days, just kind of in the evenings, and I have now really nice 4 modules that I have sub-tested this basically layout. I've sub-tested all of this. This has no actual testing done, nor has this, but kind of in theory, we know that this whole design pattern's pretty decent in general from what we learned from Q1, so that should be good. So here's my current kind of general concept for why I have kind of designed all these constraints here, is because this is going to fit nicely here, and then we can take the red circuit build that we have here, and let's copy this and grab vehicles and move this over. This would go kind of next in this. You can see how this will kind of nicely line up and tile. I still have to figure out the routing of all that stuff, but let's just kind of like lay it out in general. The next thing, and this was also intentionally designed to all snap together. So this is going to be the engine units, and engine units are going to perfectly line up right here so that we can just easily just fit this in. And in theory, we can just, by maybe just changing this to be an underground, we could just slap that right in there, and then this can exactly snug up right next to it, which would be awesome. I'll have to make a couple changes, like this needs to be, you know, not a blue belt, but this should be a green belt, and then the green belt can actually probably weave maybe underneath here, but then I just have to, yeah, this is easy, so just basically changing this to come around like that. We could remove that. But then this can just tile across like this somehow, and then I'll figure it out and make this prettier afterwards. But then that's exactly where the red circuits are going to go, and they come in here, and then just kind of come across like that, and then we'll just grab this, and then cool. So then that will get it to come out, and then we'll have the red circuits coming out here. And let's grab a green belt, and I'll just copy this real quick. Or I'll just grab the much faster version. There we go. So that'll be the red circuit. So that'll be kind of the idea. And then finally, the last bit would be this bad boy right here. So we'll put this in here, and then nice. Okay, that's not bad. Then I could, basically all I have to do is just move this up one, that's easy, and then just kind of line this up nicely, and then all I gotta do is somehow figure out how to get sulfur onto here, which might be a little bit of a challenge weaving through this already extremely compact design that I have here, but we'll make it work. Well, maybe I can somehow get an underground belt right in here and then change this, and yeah, that's gonna be a problem. I'll figure it out. Give me some time. I'll be right back after I figure out some of these layouts, and then I'll show snapping it all together. Okay, so I've broken this up now into components and figured out kind of how I want all the input ingredients to come in from and on which side, and then kind of made these so that effectively all these always kind of line up exactly with the where it's going to go next. And then had to do a little bit of belt shenanigans here to get it to get on the appropriate side. But there's, as I got the inputs wrong initially, and then ultimately just to connect and snap all this stuff together here. So without further ado, let's finally see how every single piece here combines. So we'll lay down the first part. We'll grab the second part. I'll let this all connect. That all looks good. There's that second one. Let all this back up. Good, that lined up, which is what I was hoping for. Then let's connect this up here. Don't have any vehicles shenanigans, so this should work. And although I can't get the beacon placement nicely here, one nice thing is in a real game, I've got space for somewhere in here roboports, so I can connect a network across this and actually visibly see things in this actual area. Or I could add a radar or something, but that's nice. And then that was my compromise. I couldn't actually get it to quite fit. And then we'll add the last part. We'll let all this nicely back up here. And then we'll unleash the finale. Just run this for a little bit, monitor for any gaps in the belt. Oh, that's satisfying. Actually, I will copy the entirety here without connecting any of the inputs, and then we'll just watch the whole thing just come alive in one shot. I think that'd be kind of cool. I just have to make sure that I copy the vehicles. And they should be good. This would also be good for just like having a template in general. And let's connect multiples of them. I think that could be fun too. We'll do this. Connect the next one in the series. Connect the next one in the series. And the next one there. And then I will pause the game here. Stagger this here. And then I'll connect the inputs right there. And then let's watch the whole build come alive. Probably in editing I will have sped that up, but I just watched that in real time and that was extremely satisfying to watch completely. Just everything all start up completely. So I'll do what I would normally do anyway, is just let everything back up. If I'm actually going to go and build this before connecting and putting everything out to go to labs. And then unleash it again. And let's see if I have added enough adequate lighting. I have not, so I will definitely need to add some lights. So that is definitely something that I should improve on, as right now this is significantly underlighted. That is going to be important. So I'll add some lights around here. Why not? So we'll do that here. Connect there. Because, you know, UPS is one thing, but can't just like completely give up all style points for the name of UPS, you know? Gotta have at least some lighting to have some satisfaction of looking at your base. So we'll have blue here where we're crafting this. And then I'm not gonna go color code everything. Oh, how glorious we can fit a light under a tank. Oh, we can't do that. That'd be wild, right? Yep, there we go. Could put that there. That there. It's crazy. Why not? Let's just give in to the cursed nature of this whole thing. And I like this warm lighting in general. Not a fan of the super bright white industrial lighting. I like being cozy in my actual base, my factory. So I like that. That's solid. We had that extra blue for the night, just so that I can see it. I like it. So then I'll just connect all these. Let's get some daylight again in here. Connect all this back up here. So that I have something for testing later. And then I'll create a nice little blueprint at the end, if, of course, this is better than my actual save file. So, at least the last version. And I'm hoping it is, because I spent a lot of time optimizing all this stuff here. So hopefully this is a net improvement. One thing that I still think that I need to still add is the ability to extend this clock, basically these global clocks, so that I can just connect all of these other inputs to the same circuit network. That would be nice. I don't think I could do it for engines really easily. I didn't design it that way, but I can definitely do it. Already have this pre-built here to have one clock, and then I have this set up here where I could just have to daisy chain this to the next bank. And I think actually, because this is so close, I might be able to just paste this and then manually connect it. Got green wires coming across here, so that would be really easy. I'm not going to easily get this across. Yeah, I won't. So I'd have to redesign that a little bit. I won't bother with that. I'll create a global clock if this design in general performs better, and then I can use that to connect all the banks and have just one clock on the very top version to control everything downstream. But this is solid. This all that extra time spent to just exactly get this to tile is super satisfying to look at here. So love it. All right, let's go set up some benchmarks and let's go test this baby out. So I just ran the benchmarks, and before I go into the results, just wanted to give an overview of what the test setup looks like. So it's 48 copies of the original design that I had created, and then comparing it against the new design that we just created. The original design has additionally, above the surface, it has 2 ships to simulate a ship hovering over Novice requesting biter eggs, because this is exactly what my real base, what I'm doing. I'm requesting 256,000 biter eggs all the time from a space platform, and wanted to see what the overall impact would be with this number of silos and silo chesting. It's going to be most likely, I already say it's a relatively minor impact because there's only 2 silo chests per build, so there's going to be 96 total across the entirety of this save. And in reality, I'm in my actual base, I'm only running 8 lanes of this stuff, so I don't need all 48 copies. I especially do not need to be producing 600 or 700,000 per minute on Common Chemical Science. But for testing and benchmarking purposes, definitely is worth it just to basically go and test this out. So the other save file that I have for testing all of this is I have one that I wanted to quickly highlight. This is I'm calling this my V3 version. So the last one was V2, this is now V3. So the difference on this particular setup is I have a couple different copies. I have one where I have a shared clock. So that means that I have, and all of these are banks of 12. So this whole section is sharing one clock like I had talked about previously. There's just this one clock that's to reduce the control update time of having more combinators. Just connected all of these in one network, so there's a nice block of 12. In reality, I'd only have 8 in my base, but that works for the testing purposes because this is exactly the point where I'm going to exceed the pipe length extent for the shared petroleum line that I have across everything. The second thing then is I also created a shared clock for all of these, and I did that simply by just connecting a constant combinator across all of them, having one clock here, and then just daisy chaining a constant combinator across for the additional green and red wires, and then just the green wires that were already connected to the medium electric pole got propagated. So in this design, there is one that has a shared clock for this portion and another shared clock for the red circuits. I didn't bother with the engine units as I did not account for that when I originally designed it, so maybe I'll make an improvement to have everything shared if it's worth it. So we'll talk about that in the results. The only other thing that I wound up doing, and this is useful for people to know, there's a command, you can look this up in the Factorio wiki under the console commands. There's one for turning off all the cars. I have one that has all the cars/tanks disabled, and one that has them still enabled just so that we can use that as a point of comparison. All right, enough talk about the actual setups. Let's go and talk about in Visual Studio Code what the results are. So over here in VS Code, what I've got for you today is I ran a benchmark for 108,000 ticks, and I did this for 6 runs. We're doing this on the latest release of Factorio as of recording this video. And this is the latest stable version, not the latest beta that's out. So ran this. So what does this look like? So the overall run distribution was pretty close and compact, so I was happy about that. That means it was reproducible. I chose 108,000 ticks specifically to have a very large sample window, and then ran them for multiple samples just to see how close we could get. So the distribution here usually is due to the core that got selected for the main game engine runtime. And that's just because I have some cores that are a little bit better than others. And so you'll see some of them perform worse, and you'll see these outliers. Those are ignored for the actual results. And then the overall averages were used, and that's what I use in my charting library. So that's the overall update time distribution. So let's go look at the actual results here. So version 2, the original version that I created in my first video, was the worst performer. So yes, awesome. We did actually make optimizations, and it did make an improvement. So then there's the version 3, and this has all cars are enabled. There is no shared clocking. It's just the copy of the build in the configuration that we just showed. That was this was a 100 microsecond savings across these two for a net result in being the first version was 12% worse than the new version that we created. So it's a good optimization. So we're looking at about like a 10% or so improvement net between these two designs, which is great. So then disabling the cars actually made an improvement as well. So you can see that it was 1% worse by just keeping the cars enabled. So it's a free optimization, just running that command. If you don't like losing your achievement statuses because you disable that, then don't do it. When you're running basically if you're going and creating a mega base, then you shouldn't really be caring about achievements, because at that level you are well beyond any of the achievement marks that you could be getting. So it really doesn't hurt you at that point, but some people are sticklers for it, so whatever. I don't care. I'm going to be disabling cars because I'm going to put this in my actual base. Then the next thing that I would say is we saw a small improvement here. We're talking about 6 microseconds, not a huge change, but sharing a clock made a difference because we saw the net delta that came from the control behavior update time. I'm showing this because I want to just show in comparison. Some changes may look really good in a micro benchmark, but then when you add it all together into a larger benchmark that has a lot more components in it, those little tiny changes like having a shared clock doesn't make as much of a difference as it did when I had all those red circuits that we saw in the earlier in the video, right? When that benchmark was run, that made a much bigger improvement, so that mattered. So it's kind of some of these things in the amplitude and the scale of things of how they actually work in a real base, they may not matter as much, but all optimizations help, right? So this really just effectively then you're looking at okay, if we just made one change here, that would be a 12% was worse than this version here. And then overall, it would have been 14% with the current version that's running my base, worse than the best version that we had where we're sharing the clocks and disabling all the cars. So I'll put this in my base, and then I will run it for a little bit just to make sure that everything's stable, and then I will close out this video. So I was just trying to put this in my base, and I actually went through the whole point. I had the construction robots going, remove everything, and everything was in a good spot, and then I realized that when you are building stuff in the editor, sometimes you don't realize that your power placement is just enough to miss some critical inserters because I have global electric network turned on. So all of this wasn't powered. And so I removed some of these and I undid basically. I just reverted back to an old save file. So I'll put the new version here that has the correct power poles and stuff in. But yeah, so fair warning, just, this is a note to myself. If you got a global electric network on, just turn it off and put, a power or something in here and just make sure everything's connected, because this was what I ran into, and it's incredibly frustrating when you put something in a base and you realize, yeah, these things aren't powered. So there goes 30 minutes. Back to, now that I have the correct file, I'll just start over again and let the construction bots build it. The good news is that I can learn from my previous mistakes, and I can have all the science drain first out of the builds before I go and decide to go and basically delete everything here, which is good. So you learn things by doing it a second time, Also, Spidertrons are incredibly effective at deleting this stuff. Get yourself some Spidertrons. So after a lot of work on my effort, or after my part to get the Spidertrons and everything to finally build everything, looks like we're in a good spot now. We have one clock that's controlling everything in the whole build now. So we have now, I've connected all the different sections here with the green and red wire to go all the way across them. We did the same thing for the science module on the top. I've left individual clocks for the engines just like before. I will maybe optimize that in the future. It's good enough for now. I have connected all of these to be running on one network, so they all start and stop together off of just one decider combinator that's monitoring all of them, so that should be in a good spot. Now we get to do the really satisfying part that everyone dreams about after a long period of being in the editor. I think I hopefully have all the Spidertrons connected in the right spots. Oh, it's beautiful. All right, let's watch this whole thing come alive. Maybe in real time for you. This may be in sped up version, depending on how long this takes. So enjoy this while we watch this whole thing come alive. Okay, so before we kick off the entire base for real again, I made a couple changes, which I will not include in the final blueprint, but you can by all means do this yourself. So I wound up just using one clock here for everything on the left-hand side, and then just feeding that by just daisy chaining everything with constant combinators. Did the same thing across here to daisy chain all of these furnace inserters, so they're all sharing one clock, and the same thing down here. Oh, I am missing one. I need to delete that. It's good catch. And then, yeah, I have more of these. So the whole point here was just to remove the decider combinators themselves, the extra ones that we don't need, because now we can just have one clock and one for everything. So the idea then is this would be then the lead that would, or not really, there would just be one clock for the first build here. And then I can continue to just easily copy this if I ever want to expand and just move it over one block like this over, and we should be good. So that can work in the future. And then I was just one clock to control everything here. So just one set of clocks here for every single module. The only one I didn't do is this, but it's good enough. Good enough. It works. All right, let's get to the meat and potatoes. I can keep on optimizing until the end of time. I still don't even know if Q2 is better than Q1. What am I doing? All right, there we go. Let's watch the entirety of this fill back up. All the buffers that we have here on these lanes, technically. Not really a buffer, but it's just a transport line. Let this all back up again, and then we will start off science consumption again from the labs. This should stabilize itself afterwards, so go ahead and kick it on. I use this auto research, so this will immediately kick on mining productivity. All the belts should get activated and start going again. See if the build can keep up and have constant production the entire time. Once everything stabilizes, of course. There's something very satisfying about watching this with all the transport lines exactly synced up. When having one clock like this, actually, I think the most satisfying part about clocks is just that literally every single entity is doing the exact same thing across all of the builds like this. So sometimes looking at things in the debug menu like this is pretty cool. But looks like we got constant production output, which is awesome. Exactly what we wanted. Here's a good test of losing back pressure. Got a couple transport lines here that were missing some because I did not let this fully back up before starting. So see if the science labs can actually handle this change here. Well-oiled machine. I like it. Got full production again. Fantastic. Loving it. Quick pollution cloud check. Seems to not have expanded. At least not too much. Nice. Alright, I think that concludes the video for today. I'm already liking a lot of these optimizations we've made. Being sub 8 milliseconds for mining prod is not bad at 4.5 million ESPM. So we'll see once we go and compare Q2 versus Q1 if we can get that number even lower by switching. That's actually how I would really like to test this, is testing things in my actual base and running it at full scale just to see what the overall net improvements are, and then actually benchmarking the whole base once we've got Purple Science done. That'd probably be the nicest way to actually test this in my mind, so that's what I'll probably plan on doing, just to get like the full test experience and changing it. Maybe able to just do it just in an editor world, but doing it actually in my real base might be nice to actually see the net difference, and then I can just choose whichever one I like better and just go with that. Although that's a lot more work. I don't know, we'll figure it out. Anyway, if you want the blueprint for the build that we created today, I will have it on my public blueprint page, which will be linked down below. The deadline, by the way, for Purple Science is this upcoming Friday. So if you join the Discord, go and submit some designs for Purple Science. I'm really excited already for everything that everyone's cooking up. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, especially if you spent the time and watched the long segment where I talked about sub-tick and clocking and fractional clocking. You got an amazing attention span. And if you missed that, that's also completely fine, and I totally get it. So thank you for watching the video. My name is Nasty. I will see you next time.